Keith William Schmidt was a 53-year-old from Dickinson, North Dakota. He was adopted and loved tinkering on cars and trucks. On the morning of May 20th, 2024, Keith did not show up for any of his business appointments. When searched, Keith's house was empty. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Over the past 9 years, I've made a lot of insights about video and its help in solving disappearances. My overall point has been that unless a camera captures the actual disappearance, somebody jumping off a bridge, somebody getting abducted, somebody driving off into a lake by accident, that the footage really isn't that helpful. Some examples. Kyle Fleischman on camera many times in Charlotte. No help. Rebecca Henderson captured on video in her car. No help. Clint Walker getting off a bus. No help. And I could name about 50 more examples from Unfound's history. Why is this? Because there's a lot of world outside the edges of the lens. Anything can happen. Well, with Keith Schmidt, a neighbor's doorbell camera caught something. Is it Keith or isn't it? Only the shadow knows. And now a summary of the case. Keith Schmidt was adopted at 6 weeks old and had a sister who was 14 years older than he. Keith was very close to his mother and took her death when he was 12 very hard. From then on, he seemed to be bottled up, not talking a lot and only speaking when spoken to. This would carry on until the time of his disappearance. But during that time, Keith built a career for himself. He was eventually a self-made man with his own business, carpeting and tiling homes. Keith had a very good reputation, with reasonable prices and solid work. However, there were possible signs that he was letting his business go as 2024 progressed. So, in the morning of May 20th, 2024, Keith exchanged texts with a woman who ran a local building materials business. They had known each other for several years. She texted Keith. The topic was about business. He texted back. She responded, thinking she'd hear back from Keith in moments. But that did not happen. In fact, no one heard from Keith that day or even for the next week. He was never seen again. When friends got into his house, where Keith lived alone, nothing unusual was discovered. Police eventually checked a neighbor's doorbell camera. It showed a shadow walking down the street. This person has never been identified, but conceivably, and given the timing of the texts that morning, this could have been Keith walking away from his house right after that conversation. There's no easy way, even after almost 9 years, to explain disappearances of people who seemingly left their homes willingly without any signs they were suicidal or paranoid or anything else. No easy way. Contemplate if these kinds of cases cause you to question whether you really know the people around you, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, was Keith hoarding cash with a plan of leaving his life? Number 2, was the sale of Keith's father's farm a much bigger deal to Keith than anyone really understood? And number 3, why would Keith put out his garbage if he planned to voluntarily disappear? Keith's family is open to all possibilities regarding his case. The guests for this episode are Keith's sister Laura and her husband Earl. Unfound news. The database work continues. I'm sticking to my belief that it will be finished by the end of the summer. I'm not saying it will be ready for public consumption at that point, but it will at least be ready for some beta testing. Next, the redesign of Unfound's website has started. For the most part, I haven't mentioned the website over the past 5 years that much because it hasn't been that great. Yep, that will be changing. Finally, by the time you're hearing this, I will be in Pennsylvania. Yep, I made a trip to see my dad and surprise him for Father's Day. I'll be here at least a couple of weeks, but the work will continue. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Keith Schmidt, Laura, and Laura's husband, Earl. Laura and Earl, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here. Let's just talk in general about the Schmidt family. You, Keith, how many siblings are there? Did you all grow up in North Dakota? What can you just say about the whole Schmidt, and if there's other last names in there, the whole Schmidt family?
Back in 1960, my mom had been divorced. She married Don Schmidt, and we moved. Don Schmidt married my mother in 1960 in Great Falls, Montana, and they moved to North Dakota. So that is how I got into the Schmidt family. So biologically, Don is not my dad, okay, but has treated me. He adopted me, and I belonged ever since.
Wow.
You know. Mm-hmm. And when I was 14 years old, my mom and Don/Dad, my mom and Dad adopted Keith. They adopted Keith, and he was 6 weeks old.
Oh my goodness.
To Lutheran Social Services. Mm-hmm. So we have like this big 14-year age gap.
The listeners know this, but you don't know this, Laura. I am also adopted, and I was adopted when I was a month old through Catholic Charities, and I ended up finding my biological family, or they found me, and my siblings are like 20 years older. So all of this you just said, I know exactly what that's all like. That's incredible. That's a great story.
And he was born Keith was born at the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota.
Wow. Okay. Great.
So,
great. And do you have any other siblings? You and Keith, and who else? Anybody else?
No.
No? The two of you. Okay. Okay. And what was it like being 14 years older? Of course, when you were 20, he was 6. When you were 30, he was 16. Or somewhere around there. I'm doing. I'm a business major, so I have to do business math here. You know, so what was it like having a younger brother that much, or a brother that much younger?
You know, it was really fun when I was little, and then when I was 18 and left home, I never moved back home. Mm-hmm. And so we got married in 1978. So Keith was only 7. I believe, yes. So after that, it was kind of hard to keep in touch with him. You know, I mean, they didn't live that far away, but you kind of, you know, you get your career, your job.
Sure.
So, I mean, I saw him occasionally, but not as often as I probably wished I would have. You know, when you're like 18 to 25, it's like,
Well, you have your own life to lead, and of course he has your parents as guidance. You know, I suppose being that much older, maybe you could almost be like a second mother to him. But you're alive, and you know he's being taken care of, and you have your own life to lead.
Yes, and when he was 12, our mom passed away. So, and I had a little boy. He was 1, and I was pregnant with my second. You know, so we, like you said, we had our own lives, and so when our mom passed away, Keith was closer to my mom. Our mom, definitely closer. Did everything with her. My dad had a job and did farm work on the side. So when she died, I don't know. I hate to say he got stuck with him, but he ended up alone with his dad, who really never cooked, never kept house, he wasn't the cleaner. You know, he left all the domestic stuff to my mom, so when she was gone, he had to step up and do that. So I'm sure it was hard, and I'm sure it was hard on Keith.
Right. So it was just the two guys under the one roof.
Yes.
All right. Keith, of course, still has schooling to do, you know, being 11, 12 years old when this happened, so he's like in elementary going to junior high, so he has still have all of his schooling to do. So he's quite a ways from having a career or anything.
Right. And then let's see, trying to think. So, 3. Let me see. So I'm trying to think how old Keith was. So when he was in high school, my dad ended up going on a blind date and getting married in 1983. No, 87.
So like 5 years later. Okay.
Yeah. So then she came in, and I think that helped him as far as having a motherly figure in the house.
All right. So Keith liked the new woman.
Yeah, he did.
Great. And what was her name? What's her name?
Her name's Lonnie. Swany.
Okay. All right. And so
I know.
So they got along. And did he graduate high school? What did he do? Once again, I realize you had your own life to live. You're many years older, but when you understand about his high school years, was he into things, into sports, into school, and some of those things?
No, he wasn't into sports. I don't remember. Did he go to college? For some reason, I think he went to college in South Dakota for a while.
Okay.
Aberdeen. But I couldn't tell you what he went into or drafting. I guess he went into drafting.
Okay. All right. And what about his personality? What kind of friends and, you know, what kind of, when you think of your brother now, you know, what kind of personality do you have? A lot of friends, kind of introverted, extroverted? What was he?
He was an introvert. He didn't, when he was little, he was very chatty and outgoing. Like when he was a kid until he was probably 12, like more hyperactive. So then after our mom died, then I believe he became the introvert. Didn't have a lot of friends. If you sat down at a table with him, you would have to ask him questions before he would talk to you. He would offer no information. Yeah. You'd have to ask him a question before he would talk. Okay. Unlike me.
Okay. All right. And I have to ask, being that he was adopted, did he ever show any interest about trying to track down his biological family? Did that ever come up? How about that?
I guess it came up with my dad and Swanee, but whenever they would ask him if he was interested in finding his biological parents, he always told them no. Mm-hmm. So as far as I know, he never did.
Never did. Okay.
No.
Okay. What about
It
after?
doesn't mean he didn't on the side, but
Excuse me, please say
it
that.
does. It doesn't mean he didn't, do it and not tell anybody. But as far as I know, he did not.
What about after high school? You said he went in maybe for drafting. Did he actually take that up as a career, or did he do some other work? What did he do into his 20s and 30s?
I know he worked at restaurants as a cook, and he had a job at Fisher Industries in Dickinson, and I believe that was like a drafting job. And then after that, that's when I believe he went into the flooring business.
Oh.
He laid flooring, carpeting, tile.
Okay. Right there in Dickinson, North Dakota.
Yes.
Okay. What about relationships? Ever been married? Have any children? What can you say about that?
He was never married, and as far as we know, has no children. I do remember he had a girlfriend many, many, many years ago. I never met her, but that was when he lived in Fargo. But other than that, I would say no.
Okay. Well, as a guy, if you don't know this, Laura, but I am also a guy who's never been married and I don't have any children, so I know when I'm not doing the podcast, I do have some time on my hands. What did Keith like to do with his spare time when he wasn't doing the flooring job? Was hunting and fishing, of course, North Dakota. I know that's big up there. What hobbies did he have as an adult?
He did not hunt or fish. He did have a motorcycle, and I know he must have had some friends, because I remember him saying he had taken motorcycle trips. And otherwise, he basically liked working on cars and tinkering.
Neat. Okay. And during, of course, you being much older than he is, during, let's just say, of course, he just went missing last year, but throughout the 2000s, maybe, did you see him a lot? Would you get together for get-togethers, family reunions or Christmas? Did you see him a lot, talk to him a lot, or how much contact did he have with the rest of your family as an adult?
I did not have a lot of contact. I would say we probably saw him a couple times a year, and that would be it. And not always for the holidays, but okay. I would only say a couple times a year we saw him.
Okay. And what about the rest of your family? Maybe, aunts, uncles. What kind of contact did he have with any of them?
He would only see them, I think, when he was with my dad. I don't think he purposely drove to visit any of them.
Okay. All right. I guess what you're also saying here is that he lived alone?
Yes.
Okay. In his own house? This was right in Dickinson?
Yes. He owns his own house in Dickinson, North Dakota. His house is very... what does he say? It's very minimal. He doesn't have a lot of stuff. Very simple. There you go. He lived a simple life.
Okay.
But he did, like in the house he owns, he did rent out his basement occasionally. And so I've heard from people that sometimes the people that rented from him were questionable.
Kind of shady.
But other people would know that more about that.
So maybe some shady characters once in a while renting.
That's kind of what we heard.
Okay. And maybe I should ask, this is a very common question, not particular to this disappearance or Keith or anybody else, but it's a very common question that I ask. Anything going on, let's just say 2023 into 2024, that caused people, including yourself or not including yourself, to worry about Keith? Anything he said or did during that previous year, and his personality changed, anything like that? that caused people to worry about him?
No, I don't think we really saw any of that.
Any, once again, this is just a standard question for just about any interview that I've ever done. Any drug issues, alcohol issues, ever been diagnosed? Any mental health issues, therapy, anything like that in his history?
He had alcoholic issues after high school when he went to college.
Okay. All right. What about like as an adult? Of course, he would have been not just maybe a year or two younger than I am now. Any issues as an adult into his 50s, drinking, anything?
No, we talked to some of his friends in Dickinson, and they said he would have an occasional beer in the bar with people, but no real issues that we heard of from his friends.
Okay, very good. Thank you for.
And we did find some marijuana at his house, but that was it. As far as if he ever used it, I don't know. And he was a smoker.
Okay.
A cigarette smoker.
Of course, being the work that I do, and if you don't know, I've featured on my podcast like 365 disappearances all over the United States and the rest of the world. So these are very common topics for me. Once again, just standard questions, and just to give a background on somebody. You know, we like to get to know these people as well as we can because most of the people in the audience probably did not meet Keith, so we want to have a good understanding of him. So he's living alone. He has this job. Simple guy. I don't think anybody would be surprised by that, being that he's a single guy, no kids, just living by himself. Sounds pretty normal to me as a single 50-some-year-old myself. But it came up, and as I've read, and everybody should know that I've gotten to know Laura and Earl through assistant Eric, and everybody in the audience knows who Eric is, and he has been helping Keith's family up there in North Dakota with this disappearance, and that's how I found out about it. But my understanding is that right around May 10th, is right when it seems like people started to lose touch with Keith. Would you say that that's accurate, or, you know, how do you remember it from last year?
I guess I just heard that. I didn't really know. I know he did go every weekend for the last few years. He would drive to Watford City on the weekend, mow lawn, help my dad at his house. What would you say? Yeah, Moore's father and Swanee, they moved off the farm 3 years ago this coming September.
Okay.
So in that time, in the summers, Keith would go out there and just do maintenance on the farm and take care of the buildings and then mow the lawn.
You know, just do a bunch of things, being that they couldn't maybe do that anymore because of their age.
Correct. And Keith for a while was debating whether he wanted to move on to that farm or stay in Dickinson. So he was kind of debating that for a while.
Is it your impression, Earl, that he was still debating that at the time of his disappearance?
Yes. Yes, actually, Don just sold the farm in December. Or no, it didn't. When was it? Yeah, I think it was final in December. Yeah, it was finalized in December. So I think that kind of, from talking to his friends and other people, hurt Keith that he didn't have the option to move on to the farm.
Okay. Thank you for telling me that. Okay. So he's going out being a good son, helping his father and his, I guess it was be his stepmother out. That sounds like a good guy to me, doing that on the weekends, devoting time to that. Sounds like a good guy. But going back to this May 10th date, once again, it's something that Eric and I have talked about, and I've seen it written in accounts of Keith's disappearance. Is that a date that sticks out to you, for the both of you? Sticks out?
No. You mean like have meaning for May 10th? No.
Yeah. Okay.
Nothing that we've heard about.
Okay. Very good. Then I'll move on to this. I did also read just some items that I need to ask about before we actually get to the actual disappearance and what happened that day. Is it true that there might have been some, he'd done some work, you talked about his flooring job, that were unbilled or unfinished, and he left his tools? Like I said, I've read these stories, and I've read enough stories, disappearance stories, to know that reporters get things wrong. Is all of this true, partially true? How do you understand it?
I would say, yes, it's all true.
It is true. Okay, so we'll come back to that a little later. And just, of course, I've asked about his addictions. Of course, another issue that comes up in a lot of disappearances that we feature on the podcast. Any financial issues? Keith have any problems paying any bills? Bill collectors calling him or sending him letters? Have you ever any idea about any of that?
Well, he did, when we got involved with it more, we did find out that he had 2 credit cards that he had maxed out. And then he was behind several months paying on a 2018 Mustang.
Okay. All right, we'll come back to thank you for telling me that. We will come back to that after we talk about the disappearance itself. So let's just move up to that date. Do you remember maybe, Laura, like maybe the few days before that? When was the last time, for example, maybe ask you this, when was the last time you actually spoke to Keith before he went missing?
It was my dad's birthday, and we had went to Watford City, and Keith was there. So I would say March 31st of 24.
Okay.
Was the last time I had talked to Keith.
Okay. And in your opinion, as his sister, how did he seem? Good, in good spirits? Everybody having a good time? Your impressions? No.
Yeah, he seemed normal. Okay. He chatted, and we had to ask questions, and I think that's when the topic of the farm came up too. Swanee was asking him, are you interested ever in coming, Keith wouldn't have wanted the farmland. He wanted more of the house and the buildings. And, was interested in it. I didn't mean he wanted them. And, so she was trying to tell him that, well, maybe you can move your business here. Maybe you should go in and talk to, flooring people in Watford City to, get your name out there if you would want to move here and start a business. Well, he didn't want to really leave all his clients and friends in Dickinson to move there.
Right. And being that most people maybe are not familiar with the geography of North Dakota, how much difference in miles how far is it from Dickinson to Wofford City?
It's about 80 miles.
Not close.
About 80 miles.
80 miles, not close. Okay, so that would be a big move. Decently sized big move, especially if he was going to move and, move business. The work he's doing, of course, would all be local and everything. Okay.
Right.
So you saw him at the end of March, not quite 2 months before he went missing. Everything seemed fine. What about, other people who knew him well? For example, your father. When was the last time he saw him before Keith went missing?
He went missing he saw him May 19th.
The day before.
Yeah. Yes.
The day before. And what did your father have to say about that? Anything that popped up to him as unusual? Anything that Keith said?
The only unusual thing is, he said that he wouldn't be back the following weekend, that he was busy, and he said the neighbor boys could take over mowing the grass. And that was the neighbor that ended up purchasing the farm.
Huh. And your understanding is Keith had never said anything like that before?
No.
He never said, well, the kids can do it, these other kids can do it or something. But Keith was always very reliable that he was going to do it. So he says this, And then he goes missing the next day.
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. Then what is, as best as we can tell a year later, what is the general story, the accepted story, as I like to put it, of his disappearance of that day, which I have the date as being May 20th of 2024. What is your understanding about what seemingly happened that day?
We're not sure because we weren't notified for 8 days that he was, later that he had been missing. Okay. That's when his friends notified his father that they hadn't seen Keith in a while. Okay,
so it took 8 days for anybody to realize that Keith was missing.
Yes.
So
somebody,
please.
Hold on. A guy by the name of Maxon, he works at the Esquire Bar, called my dad, I believe it was a Tuesday, the 28th, and called him and said they had not seen Keith since, it must have been May 20th. But they must not have saw May 20th either, being, anyways, what was I gonna say? Basically, they had called for a welfare check, sometime between May 20th and 28th. Yeah.
Okay.
Closer to the 28th.
All right, so, and I just checked on the calendar, May 20th, 2024 would have been a Monday. And so we're talking the 20th, as you stated, is a Tuesday. So over a week later is the first time that kind of a light bulb went off in somebody's head and says, you know what, I haven't seen Keith for a while.
Yes, and then they didn't call my dad till like the 28th, and it was in the evening because then he called me and told me, and so Earl and I went down on the 29th to file the missing persons because somebody had to do it.
Okay.
I don't know if it has to be family or what, but so we drove down the next morning, met with the detective, searched Keith's house. Mm-hmm. There's nothing there. Except his phone was left on his workbench charging.
His cell phone.
His cell phone, yep, it was on his workbench in his garage, charging. His work truck that, is a nice Dodge pickup, that was left unlocked, and he had a big trailer with all his tools in was unlocked, right? And then, so then we went checking to see if we could find the keys to the vehicle. So my husband went and he found the keys for all the vehicles except one. It's some truck in the lower part of his house. It's a 74 Ford truck, and actually, those keys were missing along with his wallet. And they do have him, the last vehicle he drove was that 74 Ford pickup to the bank to get money, which he didn't get much money. He took $100 out.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Your understanding, of course, you get there on the 29th. Were you the first people to go onto the property, or did somebody else go over there first to check to see if he was there, or were you the first people there?
No, there were some friends that had gone over there and checked to see, if Keith was there or if his vehicles were there, and but they couldn't get in his house or garage because they were locked.
Okay. So they were locked. So he's not there and the house is locked. Nobody necessarily could get in.
Correct. And then that day, a little later that day, before we had got a locksmith to get into his house, and before he opened it, one of his friends showed up with the garage door opener. Oh. And then once we got in the garage, we found a set of house keys, and then we're able to get access to the house.
Okay. A friend of his had the garage door opener.
Yeah, we're not sure how all that took place.
Yeah.
They really don't.
So that caught your attention as well. Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. That maybe the friend had a very good reason. Okay. Maybe.
Well, we don't know. We don't know. We're just happy to get access.
Sure, of course. So you get in there, and as you've already stated, nothing unusual. No signs of violence. No signs of anything that what we might class like a lamp that's pushed over or broken pane of glass. Nothing like that at all.
No, there was nothing that appeared to be a struggle of any type.
Okay.
And like Laura said earlier, he lives so simplistic. There just isn't much in the house. When we went in, there was no food in the cupboards.
Wow.
The only thing in the fridge was pop. But his friends said they didn't think that was too unusual because his once-a-day daily meal was Subway.
That almost sounds like my diet as well, so I can relate to that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So once again, as a single guy in my 50s myself, sounds like all very common things. It sounds pretty common to me. Okay. Doesn't sound like anything unusual. So please remind us again, who was the person who filed the missing persons report and actually stood there with a police officer and gave all the vitals of Keith? Who did that?
All I do is have the guy's first name, and it was Maxon. No, you filed the missing person. Who filed the missing person? I did.
Yeah, you did. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. On the 29th?
Yes, we sat at the table with the detective, and he asked all the questions, and we answered them, and then I took out, he wanted pictures of Keith, so I went to my phone, and found pictures, and I showed him the pictures, and he goes, I know him. I used to play darts with him.
Wow. Small
world. Yes, very, very small. And anybody we have seen, or even like, say we were driving, or we stopped at a restaurant, and you know how you sometimes chat, and then we'd say something about, yeah, we're here in Dickinson because my brother's missing, and you say his name, and you'll have people that go, oh, I know him. He's so nice. So I don't think he was rude to anybody. Yeah. His friends seemed to, I don't know. Yeah, nobody thinks he created enemies. No. Yeah. They all said good things about him.
Okay, good. When you started doing this, I have to ask, when you started doing this reporting, missing persons report on the 29th, were you aware at the time that the disappearance day was so far in the past as the 20th? Were you aware of that at the time, or is that not something that became obvious until later?
No, we were aware of that, and we were just totally puzzled why nobody would have said anything prior, like, yeah, like sooner, like the day, like, I don't know, but he was such a loner, so it's kind of, it wasn't like he had a lot of contact with people on a daily basis, mostly just his work.
Yeah, and of course he is, maybe if it's somebody who's working from home, as many people do these days, like over the computer, maybe some sort of call service or something, service center job or something like a friend of mine has. Maybe that is not unusual, but this was a guy who actually was going out in the community and had customers showing up at their houses. I agree with you. You would have thought that one of those people would have thought, hey, why didn't Keith show up today? And maybe look into that a little bit. I guess nobody did.
Yeah, I guess not.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still puzzled to this day about how come there was a 8-day gap between being missing and my dad being called.
Yeah. All right, so that's still a little bit of a puzzle, just even a year later. Okay. So you fill out the missing persons report, and we'll move on to this. I realize I've heard that there is actually a video showing Keith walking away, I guess, from his house that morning. Where does this video come from? How was it discovered?
Well,
the police discovered it, and it was on a neighbor's door camera down the street a ways at a kind of an off angle. But when we watched the video, the person left sometime around 6:15, 6:10, 6:15, and we've seen the video, and it's just a shadow. It's just, you can't identify it as a male, female. Well, you can't tell. It's just a shadow figure.
All right, so
Yeah,
what you're saying is people think this is Keith, but it might not be Keith.
That's correct.
Wow. All right. Okay.
I expected the video because we did go to the police station and asked to see it, and they showed it to us. And I thought it would be like, they show on Funniest Home Videos or something,
Yes.
where you can actually see that it's a person with long hair and a cap or glasses, but no, absolutely not. I mean, you can see the shadow stick figure, but that's it.
Yeah, and the really unusual thing of the situation was, in talking to people now, is everybody said a couple things about Keith. One, he was never a morning person. They usually didn't see him coming around anywhere till around 9, and he did not like walking anywhere. So he texted somebody a little after 6 in the morning just saying something about a job he was working on. Sorry, I'm been busy. I won't be doing the job. And then 10 minutes later, at 6:15 in the morning, he's walking away. So it's very unusual because he's not used to, his pattern isn't there at all for the time of day either.
Okay. So we have a situation where he goes missing, and it seems that on this day, if, of course, as maybe you maybe too would not be surprised, we've covered many disappearances on Unfound where you get texts from people's phones, but there's a suspicion, is this really the person writing that text? It's a very common thing that we have to question with many disappearances, of course, in the cell phone age, which I consider to be like the last 20 years. So maybe we're open to that, but something that sticks out is he was not a morning person, but he's sending this text, what we would consider early for a lot of people, 6-something in the morning, and then not long after that, that's when this shadow is seen.
Right.
Okay.
He actually texted that Cody was who he texted.
Right, and Cody, somebody we discussed before we
because he wasn't going to be there.
All right. Okay, so everybody's clear. If anybody has heard about a video being involved in this disappearance, there is, but this is not something that was taken in broad daylight, and Keith is only like 50 feet away. It's early in the morning, it's dark, and it's just a shadow.
Yep, and the house was across the street and down a couple, I believe. Okay. The camera, right?
And another odd thing that happened the night before is his garbage was picked up on Tuesdays, and he rolled his garbage out to the curb Sunday night.
Okay. So I guess this could be a sign that maybe he knew he wasn't going to be around, to do that on Tuesday morning. Maybe. And people do that if they think they're going on vacation or something. That's not
right, but you would think it's somebody who would be thinking of coming back, too, because otherwise, why would you care to roll your garbage out if you know you're going to walk away?
I agree with you, Earl. That's a good point. What about any other video? Anybody else have any Ring doorbell videos that have become so popular maybe the last 5 years? Maybe any videos from any stores like a convenience store? Any other cameras checked in that neighborhood or little town?
I believe they checked the neighborhood, and it's not like it's a more, not low income, it's more low income neighborhood, so they probably couldn't afford the Ring doorbells.
Yeah, there were no other, they searched the areas around it and other streets and found no other footage of Keith on any door cams.
I think they got a video of him at a food place, because they showed us that one.
Yeah, I don't remember where it was. That was a few days before his disappearance, so.
Oh, was it? Okay. if, let's just say, being that, and I'm going to be doing a map video, just to explain, sometimes when you get into audio and start describing locations, it's a little difficult. I will be doing a map video that will appear on Unfound's YouTube channel, so everybody can see kind of where he lived and the general direction that the shadow, I guess, was walking. But let's just say, whether it's Keith or not, going in that direction that the shadow was going, would there have been many other houses that would be passed, or was it going to be like woods right down the street? How would you describe the direction in which the shadow was going?
He walked north away from his house, which is away from the main business road district. So he was walking north, so it would have been a residential area.
Okay.
And there was a house next door that was all boarded up that the police have checked a couple times. They got permission and got in there, and no Keith.
Okay. I guess what I'm asking is, if the shadow kept going in that direction, would that shadow pass 10 houses before it got to the edge of town, or 20, or 50? How far from the edge of town, like getting out into the woods where, people don't live, how far would that be from where the shadow was last seen?
Where he lives in Dickinson is more on the south end, and so it would have been through most of the town to walk to the north.
Wow.
So it would have been on different homes and businesses, and
One plus at least.
yeah, definitely. If he'd have kept going north, he would have eventually he could have got to the interstate, or north of the interstate, somewhere in there.
It was like, so he was, that the shadow, if it's Keith, it's somebody. I mean, it's a human. We're not saying it's like a deer or anything. It's a human. That person's kind of walking more into town than out of town.
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Let's talk about those possessions one more time. I know we went through them very quickly. Let's just go through them again if we could. At his house, what was left behind and what was seemingly still missing? I heard you talk about his phone being still in the charger, but are there items of Keith's that are missing, maybe missing with him?
Well, the main thing that everybody talks about is he had a notebook where he kept notes of his daily activities and things, and that notebook was missing along with his wallet, and his house keys and that set of keys for the one pickup were missing.
Okay. The keys missing from where the one pickup is interesting. Could it be, this is just a question, could it be that those keys are missing because those had like the house keys? So I heard it was locked. Could a house key have been on that ring of keys?
Yes. I think so. Yes, and the garage, because we couldn't find the garage key either.
Okay. All right, we've already established no signs of violence, no signs of breaking in, nothing like that. I have to ask, just because, any weapons missing? Did he own any guns that are missing? Any knives that, a lot of people have like that knife block that everybody has on their counter. Something like that, one knife missing from that? Anything like that?
No, he had no knife block. I don't even know if he had any knives in there, but I know he did not have a gun.
Okay.
My dad actually told me that he didn't own a gun.
Okay. And what about any medications? Was Keith taking any medications that would require daily consumption? And what about those?
Not that I know of. We didn't see anything unusual in his bathroom, though.
Yeah, there was nothing that, laying around that would show that. And we haven't been able to access any of his medical records, so we don't know.
Yeah, you're not going to, unfortunately, get access to those. At least not yet. Maybe if this disappearance was 40 years old, maybe, but not 1 year, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, so we have his house that's just kind of sitting there. It maybe looks like, yeah, Keith went out for a morning walk and maybe never came back. If we're to think it's the shadow, maybe it's something else. Okay. You mentioned this text, and Cody is still somebody that I would love to speak to. I've not spoken to her yet. We're doing this interview on June 10th of 2025. I'm still very hopeful that maybe I'll get to talk to her, include her in the episode. But could you go over this text again that you mentioned earlier? How do Cody and Keith know each other?
Cody owns a decorating business where she sells carpeting and flooring and tile.
Oh, okay.
So Keith went there for his supplies from her. Well, I'll just go to the beginning.
All right, so they knew each other through business and had known each other for a while.
Correct.
Okay.
He texted her. That was something else. 5:20 at 5. May 20th at 5:56 a.m.
Okay.
Sorry, been busy. And then she goes, just checking on you. I have your tools here at the store from Claire's Flip House. And he didn't call her back.
Never responded.
No.
Okay. And of course, his phone was found back at his house, still in the charger. Any proof that he ever called or texted anybody after that?
No.
The police said there was nothing on his phone.
Yeah, they went through his phone and because I asked the question, did he text someone and say, I'm going to meet you at a certain place or time? And he said there was no personal text on the phone. It was all work.
So she texted him. Seems like it was kind of thing where she should have gotten a response. No response. I have to ask, any story that Keith might have had more than one cell phone?
We kind of wondered that
We
too.
thought it, but we can't prove it one way or the other.
This does not usually come up, but being when I know that a person has his or her own business, very common for them to have a personal phone and then like a work phone. Of course, a lot of people just have one phone they use for everything, but it's not uncommon. But so we're just not sure on that. Probably leaning toward no, he didn't have a second phone.
Probably not.
We didn't find any bills like he had a second phone unless, he paid cash for a lot of stuff. So like, we didn't find anything that has to do where he wrote checks. He would always just use cash to pay for everything.
Okay, that's smart to do if you can do it.
And he would get like a money order to, like
For his car parts, he worked on his pickups a lot. And he got parts from different places online, but he would just pay with a money order through Western Union.
Okay. Being that you've brought up cash and money situation, of course, early in this interview, we did talk about that he might have been having some money issues. Any insight onto how long this had been going on and why it arose in the first place? Now that you maybe did get to look at his finances, was he living beyond his means? Was his business not doing very well? Were there other things that are popping up? How do you view it now?
It appears that he wasn't working as many jobs as he normally did.
Okay. And I guess this had been going on for a while?
Correct.
Okay. Any insight into that? Is it just simply because there wasn't a lot of work to do, or was he getting a little, frankly, was he getting a little lazy? Maybe being, just maybe a little burned out doing flooring? Any insight into any of it?
That would be a Cody question.
Okay. All right.
To be honest, when we talked to her, she said there was work out there.
Okay.
But when we got his tax records for the year, there was nothing on there to really report or claim.
Okay. And I will ask her if I get to talk to her. I will surely ask her. Your opinion as grown adults, how bad was his money situation?
I didn't think it was that bad considering he owned his home and place he had all that collateral he could have used to borrow against.
Yeah.
So financially, he owned all the vehicles except one, and his house is paid for. So financially, I think he was fine. He didn't have anything left in the bank though, in either his business or personal account.
No, there's less than $100 in both of those because we did get those. I do know that our dad gave us $10,000 for Christmas. So he got that in December. And apparently he must have just cashed it, though, because we couldn't find any record of it on the bank statement or whatever. And then he had went to Watford City, like January. I think January. And then my dad had asked him if he needed any money. And Keith said, well, yeah, I could use some. And my dad gave him $5,000. So he had $15,000 in 2 months, but we didn't find it at his house.
Wow.
So we don't know, you don't know if he cashed it and was going to use it to disappear or...
Right.
I don't know.
Right. And of course, you said that his credit cards were maxed out. Obviously, he didn't use that money to pay down his credit cards.
Exactly. And he was behind on his MDU and his city bill, too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like 3 months?
Yeah.
2-3 months?
Yep.
Okay.
So he's behind on those.
So I'll just ask you point blank, even though you've kind of said it, but just to maybe put it as clear as possible. He got this money, and it's not clear whatever happened to that money.
Correct.
All right, so, okay. All right, so you file the missing persons report. You get this see this video of a shadow, maybe Keith, maybe not Keith. And eventually I know that there were searches done. I think that's maybe when Eric got involved. At some point, I know Eric, my assistant Eric, got involved in all of this. But where have all these searches been done? Who's organized them? How many people? What can you say about what's gone on over the past year?
Well, we know that the police did, I guess they had, the police I think in Watford City searched the farm, and then the detective here sent a crew out to the farm to check themselves.
Well, I know they've walked the area around his neighborhood, and they've also used drones to go up and look around the area to see if they could see anything from using the drones.
And they did that right away as soon as they found out.
And then they've done just two searches in the Dickinson area where just volunteers have come together and with the help of Badlands Search and Rescue, they've kind of divided up the area in quadrants and just kind of assigned different areas for people to walk, so they've been doing that.
And now this Saturday, which we feel bad we're not there, this Saturday they're doing another search, and it's going to be the 2 junkyards, right? Beanie liked going to the junkyards for car parts. That's their main place to search this on Saturday the 14th, I think.
Yep.
Now, maybe I should ask you this, being that if we're to believe this is Keith walking, this shadow, but once again, there's no proof that it is, he did at least have one vehicle that was working. If he wanted to go somewhere, one of his vehicles was working. He could have driven it somewhere, right?
They were all working. He has a 18 Mustang that he drove,
He drove to Watford City.
And then he had a work truck that was drivable, and then a Bronco vehicle, a motorcycle, Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and 3 pickups that have started all of those, so.
Yeah, and going back to his finances, I mean, if he was really in a bind, he could have sold a couple of those, right?
Exactly, right.
But I guess he didn't. So
yeah,
there's that. And you did tell me all of them were paid off except one of them.
Correct. And another thing we found odd too is that he dropped his insurance on his home in 2013.
No, 23.
Or 23, excuse me. 2000. Yeah, he dropped his home insurance in 2023.
All of it? All of the insurance?
Well, he had some of his vehicles still insured, but his home insurance he dropped in 2023.
Wow. So if it had gone up in flames, that would have been that.
Correct.
Okay. Wow. Regarding these searches, once again, I've never been to Dickinson, North Dakota, but it does sound like, they did a lot around the area. How much of the searching was determined by this video of the shadow? Any of it, or not?
No. And then also that Badlands Search and Rescue had walked some of the area too with dogs to check the areas.
Okay. Of course, this does pop up once in a while, so I have to ask, anybody who claims they saw Keith that day on 20th walking through Dickinson, somebody else who might have been up early that day, if this were Keith, anybody that says, you know what, I think I saw a guy matching Keith's description walking somewhere, anything like that?
No. None.
Wow. Your impressions of Dickinson, North Dakota. A lot of people up early in that town in May? At 6:30 in the morning when the shadow was out walking around?
I would say yes. I mean, there's a lot of, medical jobs or different jobs that are on different shifts.
Right.
Or people would have been out.
And I'm also thinking...
Excuse me.
Please. Sorry.
Actually, we live in Bismarck, so we're like 100 miles away.
Yeah, so you don't maybe know the Dickinson morning life and night life or anything. Okay, I gotcha.
Right, and there's a lot of oil workers in the town, and they're up at all hours heading out for stuff.
Right. I guess the reason I'm asking is I have some friends of mine who are teachers here in Pinellas County, which is a suburb of Tampa. And I know many of them get up early to get to school, kind of get everything. And it's not unusual for them to be up at like 5:30 in the morning and then leaving their house 6:15 to get to their the high school and be prepared when the kids show up. Maybe it's 7:30, quarter to 8. And so this is May. I'm thinking maybe school is still in North Dakota. Those are the kinds of people maybe I'm thinking about in their cars, having maybe passed somebody like Keith in the morning. I guess not. Nobody's ever come forward.
Right. And to me, Keith is the kind of person, like, say he had walked outside and somebody was at the corner of his block and said, hey, can you come help me? My car's acting up, or could you come help me do this? Yeah. Keith would have walked down to help them. He was a kind-hearted person that would have did that.
Right. I think that I didn't know him. I don't know him, but I get the idea that you're right. I get the idea that you're right. Now, you did say that some searches were going to be done this weekend, this coming weekend, which would be like the 14th and 15th.
On Saturday.
Saturday the 14th. Okay, and where are those going to be? Where are they going to be concentrating this time?
What's the junkyards?
It's the two junkyards.
The two junkyards are going to be the main places. I think that's a pretty interesting idea.
What's that?
Sure.
What's that? R1. This is the R1. Oh.
Okay. Anybody that's been able to give you any insight? Of course, we've talked to, this is why we're here. We're talking about Keith. Of course, we've heard that he had some money issues, but they did not seem to be money issues that were insurmountable. It kind of goes back to, his mental state. Anybody after the fact come forward and say, Keith said this, he said that, any what we might call suicidal ideations, things, well, I shouldn't be here, anything like that. The people
no.
In the last year.
No.
Nothing.
No. As far as the money situation, there have been a few people that have come forward that have said they owe Keith money that he never billed them for.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, there was one guy we talked to, and he said he owed Keith money, and he still had the check laying there to pay him for what he had did. I just told him, I I'm not going to take the money, so.
Right, so there's another way that he could have gotten out of his financial issues if he was collecting the jobs that he did. Okay. Well, let me ask you this, being that, it's a service business, helping people working in their houses. Did he have any job issues? Anybody who might have done work for, the person wasn't pleased? Anybody, any stories of, a disgruntled customer or maybe a competitor or something, anything like that?
No, I don't think so, because Cody said everybody liked his work. He had repeat customers, so that she was aware of.
Laura, being that you are Keith's sister, how tough has the last year been?
It's been pretty stressful. We have to take time and run down, drive to Dickinson and go through his house, or we've been through his house enough, and there's nothing different. No clues. It was really, really hard on my dad.
Yeah.
So, although he did just pass away, so I guess he knows where Keith is what we were told. At the funeral, people would tell us, well, now your dad knows what happened to him. But we don't.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that the afterlife is like that. I certainly am hoping that. Of course, there's no guarantees, unfortunately. That's why we try to solve these things here in the material world. We can only hope that is the truth. So
do you ever hear back, and if people have been found, do they let you know?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. I keep in contact. I've been doing this for almost 9 years. And I wouldn't, there's some of the guests who I've become very, very close to. Very, very close. Other ones, maybe I talk to them once a year. But I really do, even 365 disappearances now, I really do try to keep up with all of them as best as I can. And about 10% of the disappearances that we've featured on Unfound have been resolved to one extent or another. We do have some where people have been convicted of causing the disappearance, but the missing person is still missing. And then we also have some disappearances that are completely, absolute murders, that were disappearances that were eventually solved. Somebody goes to jail, the victim is found. We've had, I think, at least one suicide that was solved. The young man was eventually found. Some accidents. We've had a little bit of everything that has been resolved over the past 9 years. And we've even had a few people that ended up being alive. It runs the whole range of anything kind of disappearance that you can think of that we've experienced as being resolved. So that's why we always hold out hope that we hope these people are not deceased. So I do hear back, and I think the podcast, especially in the last couple of years, has been, I think, has certainly motivated some disappearances where we covered a disappearance, and maybe within the next couple months it gets resolved. We had 5 of those happen, I think, in 2023.
Okay.
So,
I kind of like listening to people or friends or people kind of give us their theories or ask us what we think. And
what have some friend we can talk about that. We don't like to do a lot of theorizing on official interviews, but certainly if there are friends of Keith's who have their own ideas, people who are around maybe every day or at least every few days, what have they said?
They don't know. They don't have a clue. Puzzled. Yeah, they're all very puzzled by it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, on one hand, the it's hard to understand the money situation. That's as you would probably expect when people start having money issues that can bring on all sorts of bad thoughts for anybody. But on the other hand, it did seem he had some ways to get out of the money problems, as has been explained, and seemed people liked him and probably could have helped him out, some way. Just, I think maybe the issue here is, as you've said, Keith wasn't a big talker. It sounds like so he could have been internalizing a lot about what was going on in his life, which a lot of times, can be destructive. So there's that. But do you have a Facebook page, website, anything like that set up for Keith's disappearance, Keith and his disappearance?
No, I don't.
Okay. You might want to think about that. Just as a suggestion, most of the disappearances that I feature do at least have a group or a page. Now that this disappearance is a year old, I can understand if it was just a few weeks old, that might be a little premature, but now that we're into a year, you might want to think about that and, get more attention, especially in the Dickinson, North Dakota area. Certainly. Something to think about. Easy to do.
Yeah, the Dickinson Police have a Facebook page where they have it out there, and then the local press has covered it.
Eric did a great job writing for the newspaper.
I saw.
We happened to be going through Dickinson then, and we actually bought the paper newspaper. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did a fantastic job. He covered pretty much all of it.
He did.
He did. Yes, he did a great job.
I read it. He sent it to me. I think anybody who reads that article, what he's written, when what he said about Keith's disappearance is the best example of why he's a very valued member of the team that we have here. So,
yep. And like he said, somebody out there knows something.
Maybe. I have to say that 9 years into doing this as a job, of course, Eric, he's an assistant, he's a volunteer, but he's a professor and he does a lot of other things. This is my only work. And what I will tell you is, unfortunately, you learn a lot of times when disappearances are solved that the only person who knew what happened was the missing person himself. Unfortunately, I realize it's a very popular saying out there, well, somebody knows something. Well, if you're including the missing person, yes. But if you're not including the missing person, there's really no guarantee of that.
Yeah. And the city of Dickinson has I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
No, the city of Dickinson has what's their Facebook page that they have out there? He's been on that quite a bit.
It's called What's Up Dickinson. Yeah. It's been on there, and I know Eric has shared it quite a bit, and
it pops up quite often on Facebook.
I mean, I put stuff on my Facebook page that people I know and friends can see. Like I put something out there the year of his disappearance, and like where the F are you, Keith? Because I think if he would be alive out there, maybe somebody he's hanging out with has Facebook and would see it and know. These people really care. You really should go home, but
people do care.
I
agree.
My personal thought is he is not alive. So,
well, I can speak on this on the record because everybody in the audience knows about what happened here. But I covered a disappearance a few years ago. The missing man's name was Brandon Roberts. The way I remember it, he was somewhere in his 30s. He was a guy who had some drug issues, but he'd kind of cleaned himself up and was actually helping other addicts get over their addictions in Portland, Oregon. And he went missing. And his mother, I think, lived in Ohio, was trying to call him, couldn't reach him. Everybody's very worried. Did Brandon go back into his addiction again? Was he homeless? What was going on? And in fact, at one point, his mother called his phone, and somebody else answered. And the guy said, I don't know whose phone this is. Somebody just gave it to me. I'm standing here at this gas station. And this woman came by and just said, will you give me $10, I'll give you this phone. That was the story that his mother got. And as you can imagine, his mother was the guest on my podcast a couple years ago. And of course, she was worried sick. She thought, oh my gosh, what happened? And everybody, because of that, and of course, it was a disappearance. And I think he was missing for like 3 years at that point, something like that. Would you believe that Brandon Roberts ended up being alive?
Wow.
Lucky family.
Though nobody could reach him, even though he was probably homeless at the time, even though I think he fell back into his addiction, even though somebody else had his phone, he ended up being alive. And the way they found it out is that he got burned somehow. Something happened somewhere in Portland where he got severely burned. Somebody called it in. He got taken to the hospital, and they identified him. And he lived through that.
Wow.
So this is why, in disappearances like Keith's, I think it's always very healthy to have a very hopeful attitude. Now, there will be many other disappearances that have been featured on my podcast where the odds of those people being alive is not good. But when you have a situation where it doesn't seem like it's foul play, and it seems that he was acting somewhat rationally, if he did walk away from his house, locked his door and everything. And of course, we have this missing money. It very well could be, maybe I need a new start. I got this $15,000. I'm going to California or something.
That's my husband's thought.
There's no guarantee of that. But, in my work, you have to start putting things like in a probability scale. And the Keith type of disappearance is always one of those where there's more hope than many others. I would, be just putting that on the record for everybody. But Earl and Laura, any final words before we complete this interview?
Not at this time, no.
No, thank you very much for doing that. We really appreciate it. Anything that can get out there to help us find Keith we appreciate.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're happy to do it. I hope you will keep me posted. I know that Eric will keep me informed as to what's going on, and he's very helpful. Eric is a very good, conscientious, wickedly smart guy who knows a lot about disappearances, and I would urge you, any advice or anything that he has for you, you should surely take it. Surely, having known him, as long as I have, and I really respect. He's doing some other work for me and some other projects we have going on, and he just is really good. I'm happy to call him a friend and an assistant for the podcast. So, and I appreciate him telling me about Keith, and I'm always here if you want to talk again, for sure. Laura and Earl, I appreciate you both being on this episode of Unfound.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and
thank you very much. We appreciate you doing this podcast for us.
You're welcome. And that was my June 10th, 2025 interview with Laura, sister of Keith Schmidt, and Laura's husband, Earl. I thank them for joining me and all of you for this episode. And of course, a huge shout out to Assistant Eric, who alerted me to Keith's disappearance and who has done hands-on work in trying to figure out what happened. I made a map video to explain where Keith's house was and where he could have walked, if he walked, that morning. Please find my analysis on Unfound's YouTube channel. During the interview, Cody was mentioned. She was the person who texted with Keith on the morning that he disappeared. She called me shortly after the interview ended. I told her that the conversation was off the record, so I will be careful with what I say. I think I can safely say that her thoughts echo Laura's and Earl's. A year later, there is a sense of confusion and dumbfoundedness. Cody never saw this coming. Also, from a factual point of view, that morning was the only time in the 7 years of knowing Keith that Cody and Keith texted back and forth in the early morning like that. The only time, and I will reiterate, it was about business. Something to think about. So what do I think about Keith's case? Could this be a suicide disappearance? Absolutely. There are no facts to dispute that. The money situation, the work situation, the kind of isolation that seemed to envelop Keith, the ending of a text exchange with a friend in mid-conversation, Keith's phone being left behind. All bad signs. Yes, nothing definitive, but there's nothing good in any of that. Yet, I have to admit, there's a part of me that wonders if this is all just a little too obvious. Because we may look at it this way. Right now, a year in, this is a mystery. People have looked for Keith and not found him. Meaning if Keith planned his disappearance and suicide, he most likely did not want to be found. So we could infer that he wanted this to be a mystery. But Keith left his house in a condition that seemingly leaves no mystery. He took off on his own. He had to know that in leaving, people would look at his finances and find them in bad shape. Thus, once again, people would come to one specific conclusion because of it. So why then create the mystery of being hard to find? Keith left his phone behind. He would know what people would think about that. What I'm saying is, perceptually, he created a mystery by disappearing, but the way Keith left his things in his life left no mystery. Meaning, is it maybe too obvious that Keith left on his own to harm himself? It's something to think about. Could this be foul play? Well, there are no facts to dispute it, and the idea doesn't defy any laws of physics. But there's nothing I heard that causes me to think anybody wanted to harm Keith. In fact, he was such a solitary guy, how could he have ticked anyone off? However, as we know from news stories about business owners taking drastic actions after getting upset from customer reviews on Yelp and elsewhere, we may consider this as an on-the-fringe scenario for Keith. What about all his clients? So there's a lot to consider for Keith's case, more than what might be evident upon first glance. And I have no shadow of a doubt in thinking that. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Keith Schmidt, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I'll leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.